So, no, I wouldn't say I have a passion for HR.
Welcome back to Human Resources for the People. It's a human capital revolution. Today we're going to be talking about hiring employees in Malaysia. It's part of the long-running series here on this channel to look over international human resources law and comparative politics. And today we've got a real, interesting one with respect to Malaysia. The American flag looking flag isn't the only thing that Malaysia has in common with the United States. This article is from the employment law firm Scrine, and it's part of Lexology. If you want to learn more about comparative HR, check out the link down below. Lexology does a great job on all fronts with respect to law, whether it be contract law or employment law or anywhere in between. So we'll get started here with restrictions on background checks or applications. And there are no restrictions. There is a requirement of legal requirements under the Personal Data Protection Act, and there's a lot of these where the Personal Data Protection Act is ultimately what governs background checks. You see that in Western Europe, you see that in the Gulf states, and quite a few other places throughout the world. And so the Personal Data Protection Act, or something similar, is what governs a lot of the background check restrictions in employment law. Somewhat similar to this is the medical examination. You can do it. There are no restrictions or prohibitions on a medical exam as a condition of employment, but it must go by the Personal Data Protection Act of 2010. And an employer can refuse to hire an applicant who refuses to submit to a medical examination. So very similar to the United States. I mean, of course, under the ADA, you want to keep the scope of a medical exam fairly narrow if you're wanting to do something like that. And I think that the ADA is really what drives it in the United States, and any prohibitions upon medical exams are really driven by the ADA. After that, we look at drug testing. There aren't any restrictions or prohibitions against drug and alcohol testing. It has to be subject to the Personal Data Protection Act, and the employer can choose not to hire an applicant who refuses to submit to such a test. And here we're going to be talking again about the federal nature of laws in the United States. There are municipalities where, for example, drug testing is prohibited, or perhaps except in certain circumstances, or only certain drugs are allowed to be drug tested. But I do find it interesting that Malaysia is, again, very similar to the United States. There are no requirements to give preference in hiring to, but the Persons with Disabilities Act of 2008 does make sure that they have right to access employment on an equal basis with a person who's without disabilities, and that's excellent. The United States does a really good job with respect to disability accommodation, and it far surpasses most countries with respect to disability accommodation. There doesn't need to be an employment contract, but there is, if there is a employment contract that is more than 1 month, it has to be in writing. But just because there isn't a written contract does not by itself invalidate an employment relationship or the contractual terms. The next one I find interesting is the probationary period. There's no maximum probationary period by law. We've seen that before, and of course you can extend a probationary period if they're not meeting the required standard of performance. And they recommend that the contract of the employment reserves the employer's right to extend the probationary period going forward. I find that very interesting. I mean, of course, in the United States, there is no probationary period required by law. We've seen as little in this study that we've done so far, seen as little as 1 month and as much as 6 months. So I think it's important to note the wide array of probationary periods as permitted by law. And then finally, the governing of temporary staffing through recruitment agencies. There is no legislation about hiring temporary staff. Many countries have, specific rules surrounding temp staff. They can't work, or they can only be temp for, a month or something of that nature. But the recruitment agencies do have to comply with Private Employment Agencies Act of 1981. And so anytime that they're doing that, they have to register with the Director General of Labor 14 days before supplying the employee, which is a little bit crazy. I mean, this is just temp work. I mean, in the United States, it's very much not that important, and certainly not worth telling a government official about the undertaking. But here in Malaysia and much of the world, you do have to do something of this nature. In addition, there's a more recent act that says that any contractor for labor who supplies any employee, they have to enter that contract in writing, and they'll make a contract or any other document available for inspection. So there's even more control with respect to temp agencies. None in the United States, and this is really where the United States and Malaysia seem to differ quite a bit, is its treatment of recruitment agencies. Let me know what you think about Malaysia or the rest of them in the comments down below. I think that digging deeply into
What do
other
you think about
countries'
today's video?
methods
Please
of managing
comment
their
down
employees
below.
teaches us
Like,
quite a bit
share,
of
and
lessons
subscribe.
in
It
our own
really
world.
helps out.
Let me know,
And I'll
like,
see you
share,
on
and
the next
subscribe, and we'll
one.
see you on
Bye,
the next video. Bye,
guys.
guys.